First question. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. I would obviously say that it should definitely serve humanity rather than transnational corporations. Strongly agree. Now, again, I think what they should have done is they should have said, is economic globalization inevitable? Because some people, that's an ideological question, right? So the first question maybe should have been, do you think globalization is inevitable? And then regardless of what you think, if it's inevitable, who do you think it should serve? I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. Strongly disagree. Easy answer there. I'm not, it's not that I'm not proud of Canada ever. Canada's on certain things is decent, but I'd also be foolish and disingenuous to not recognize that Canada was founded and perpetuates the genocide of Indigenous peoples. And that alone is something that means I can't support my country all the time. And so, of course, I would not support my country all the time. That's an easy one. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I'm going to agree with that one. Not strongly, because in general, like where you're born is largely happenstance. You don't get to decide where you're born. And so I would say that like your country of birth isn't necessarily a great point of pride. But I could see why some people take pride in their society as it exists because collectively it's been built a certain way. And so I'm not going to romanticize Scandinavia, right? I'm not going to say Scandinavian society, perfect, beautiful, great. But I guess I would say that, Scandinavian society, they've achieved a lot of things with social equality. And if you've lived there your whole life and you feel you've contributed to that, then maybe you would be a little proud of that, right? Do you know what I mean? So that's why I'm saying agree instead of strongly agree. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. Strongly disagree. I don't feel any race is superior or inferior to any other. And, certainly, we see how white people are. If there was a hierarchy, we wouldn't be at the top. Let's just put it that way. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm going to strongly disagree with that one. Because I think it depends what the word friend here is an issue. Like the enemy of my enemy could be an ally strategically is something that I would maybe disagree with to some degree, or I'd be agree or disagree. But to say they'd be my friend, no, not at all. A friend, like a comrade, a friend, somebody you really trust, is fundamentally different than like a strategic ally. So for instance, you might say, that, you're aligning with some of the neoliberals to stop Trump. A lot of people are doing that. But they're not your friend. Like, the point is, like, November 4th, if Biden's president, we're going to war with Biden, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, at least the left is, they should, right? So, that's why I put strongly disagree there. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Strongly disagree. I mean, there might be popular revolutionary action that violates international law, and maybe that would be more justified, but I can't think of a military action that justifies international law, especially given that when it's my country, Canada, or the United States that does it, it's almost never justified. And in fact, most military action that obeys international law is often unjustified. See, some of this, and Christopher K notes here, like, how are these supposed to be taken literally? And that's one of the challenges of the test, one of the limitations. So I'm like, this is why I'm talking through it with you guys. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I would say I disagree. I wouldn't say I strongly disagree, because there's some like infotainment which is not really informational. But I also feel that, like, we live in a time where people have the ability to learn and to communicate and to build, like, communities and network in a way that's fun. I would like to think that my content is informative, but also at least marginally entertaining, right? And you also have other left tubers that are entertaining and informative. Some on the more informative side, maybe like myself, and some that are more and less entertaining, and some more entertaining and less informative. But I don't think it's a bad thing. You know, I don't think it's a bad thing. People are ultimately divided by class more than nationality. Strongly agree. This is, of course, not to say that national divisions don't exist, and that in some cases, class and nationality can coincide. In certain countries, for instance, minority populations have different class interests, especially historically. Like, if 90% of one nationality or race or ethnicity are all poor, then in essence, you can't fully disconnect class from nationality, right? But I would say ultimately the principal divide, whether or not people feel it, right? Whether or not people feel it, the principal division is class. 100%. And I'm not a class reductionist. You guys know that. A lot of people, like anyone who's a class reductionist would probably call me an SJW. But like, I do think class is the primary divider of people. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I would say that I strongly disagree. I know the historical roots of this question go back to the period I study, where governments, neoliberal governments especially, basically prioritized limiting inflation by like letting unemployment like spike. But my view is through planning, through government planning and through things like that, you can at least partially limit both inflation and ensure high or full employment. So that's my take there. I think that, maybe under a purely capitalist mindset, you want to control inflation, and like, so therefore you let people go unemployed. And of course, inflation can be bad, obviously, but I'd rather have a slightly higher inflation than people being structurally out of work when they don't need to be. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulations. Strongly agree. I mean, I don't need to add anything there. I mean, I would say, like, here's what I would say, is because corporations cannot be trusted, they require nationalization or taking over by worker cooperatives. I would still say strongly agree. That's an easy one. I don't need to spend much time on that one. We're going to just... From each according to their ability to each according to their need is a fundamentally good idea. Strongly agree. For those who don't know, that's quoting from Karl Marx, from that thing that, we should not just divide resources based on quote unquote merit or what people quote unquote earn, but we should gear our economy and our distributive systems to what people need. You might also say, in a sense, it's like, do you produce for profit and for enrichment, or do you produce for use and what people need? And I would say that necessarily, like, it's, you might never have to do something 100% one or the other way, but that until everybody has what they need, we should have, like, people shouldn't just be able to have so much luxury. Monsanto is good for it. It's funny. The freer the market, the freer the people. Strongly disagree. This isn't to say, of course, that markets, can't have elements of freedom, but I think markets in a lot of ways can subordinate people, can trap people. Like a free market for healthcare removes choice for most people. For rich people, for well-off people, they can have choice. But for regular people, I would say that at least as it pertains to necessities like housing, healthcare, food, things of that sort, free markets do not lead to freedom. They lead to subjugation and a constriction of options. And markets that give a lot of power can give outsized social and political and cultural and economic power to those with resources. How's it going? Like, are people able to follow along as I do this? Let me know. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Strongly agree. Now, the way it's worded, I mean, bottled water is bad for the environment. It's not that it's not that I don't see the need in some cases for bottled water. Like, if you're going on a long trip, it's good to have bottled water sometimes. In certain communities in Canada, we have to be perfectly real. Americans might not know this. Our indigenous people go decades in some cases without clean water. They can't drink their own water, and so they have to rely on bottled water in a lot of cases. But in a sense, like the commodification of water as a vector of profit motive in and of itself is certainly an issue. And if you look here in Canada and in the US, basically we give our water away for free to companies like Nestle and other conglomerates, and then they turn around and sell that water back to the people, at a profit. I don't know why we need that. I don't know why we need that. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Strongly agree. I agree with that. Now, I'll speak to the extent that I live in a society and my wife and I are homeowners. Brianna and I own a home. And with that home comes an extremely small piece of land that we own. We are land owners. But in a sense, land and housing and things of that sorts should not be seen as strictly personal property, at least not in an ownership sense. I think people should have the right to have a piece of land and a home that is theirs. Much like, the meme, like the communists be like, they're like, the communists are going to steal your toothbrush, right? Well, of course not. Everyone should have personal property. And under socialism, the goal should be to proliferate and egalitarianize access to personal property. Not eliminate people having possessions, but assuring that the poorest people have more and that the rich have less that they don't need. Right? So, basically, my view is that land shouldn't be a commodity. Land shouldn't be a commodity. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. I would strongly agree with that. Although I would also add that, this is sort of leaning us to the, the idea that there are good capitalists and there are bad capitalists, right? That, at the end of the day, there are good capitalists that make things that you buy, that you can hold. They're they make real tangible goods. And then on the other hand, you have the bad capitalists who just move money around and manipulate the stock market. And I'll tell you one thing, that distinction not only makes no sense to me because capital exploitation is capital exploitation, but it also leads into anti-Semitism. Going back for a long time, it was often seen that the financier capitalist class was the truly evil one. That your Henry Fords and your JP Morgan, or your like, your the owners of US Steel and the owners of the mines, and these capitalists were good capitalists because they made things, or they extracted the resources that made things. But like the financier class, the Rothschilds, this sort of discourse, these people are the truly evil capitalists. They are the parasites. So I agree with this, but like I would also say it's just, it's regrettable that people make fortunes off capitalism. So that would be my argument. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Again, I would say strongly agree. Even if you're not a full... And see, this is the way the question is worded. If it said protectionism is necessary in trade, I might just put agree. Because I would say, yes, it does, but maybe not in all cases 100%. But because it's sometimes necessary, I would say, yes, it's sometimes necessary. So, for instance, just a couple examples. Small countries might need to protect local industries. You might have resources that are strategic. You might want to have local food supplies or national food supplies that aren't strictly based on foreign trade. And so you're willing to sacrifice a bit of market efficiency, quote unquote, even under like neoliberal conceptions, to have a increase of trade or a protection. So you might say, on the pure economics of it all, it's like we should not produce any milk or eggs in this country. It makes no sense. We should just import them from other countries. But what if those other countries have shortages? What if we get into a trade dispute with those other countries? Maybe it's good to have a domestic industry, even if it's not perfectly efficient, and even if it requires some protectionism to have that industry operate. You can agree or disagree with that, but that's my perspective, right? That's my perspective. And, can protectionism be used in some cases to protect workers? In some cases, it could be. So that would be my argument. Yeah, people are saying to bring up the Irvings. Guys, just look up the Irvings in New Brunswick. The Irvings in New Brunswick are like, but in global terms, they're billionaires, but they're not mega billionaires. Like they're not like, Bloomberg rich or Walmart rich, but like they control one province of New Brunswick of Canada so thoroughly, like it's they have a level of power over that part of Canada greater than any billionaire has any control over any area in the US. The rich are too highly taxed. Completely disagree. Oh, wait, I skipped one here. Okay, I'm going to go back to that. The rich are too highly taxed. Strongly disagree. I'll come back to that. You guys don't need to hear me expand on that one too much. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholder. Strongly disagree. I know that under the current legal structure, like a company, a publicly traded company, that's their goal, is to deliver profits to shareholders. I understand that that's the law, but that shouldn't be, and certainly a social responsibility, obviously not. And I would argue that more often than not in all cases, but more often than not, social responsibility and the interest of the shareholders are at odds with one another more than they are, complementary. Okay, here we have those with the ability to pay should have high. The rich are too highly taxed. So yeah, obviously strongly disagree. On income alone, you could have higher income taxes on the higher tax brackets. Higher brackets and then higher percentages on those brackets. This is in Canada and the USA at all levels, right? But beyond that, as some people are noting in the comments, tax capital gains, certainly. Tax capital gains. A stock transaction tax. The rich in Canada, for example, if you make $100,000 a year on labor, you pay taxes on your whole income. If you make $100,000 flipping stock or on rent profit, like you're a landlord, you don't pay taxes as much. If you sell properties for a living, if you flip properties for a living, you don't pay as much taxes. You don't pay as much. Like, only a portion of your income is taxed. And so Vox, and again, Vox is very liberal. They're not even leftist, really. But Vox did a video last year where they showed that when you factor in all the kinds of taxes Americans pay, not just income, but sales taxes and payroll taxes and all of those things, the poorest people pay more than the richest as a percentage of their actual money. And so, yeah, the rich are definitely undertaxed. Undertaxed, 100%. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Strongly disagree. My view is that that will lead to a broken model. It will lead to a two-tier system where the care is worse for those on the quote-unquote public option. This is one of the reasons, besides the fact that it would leave 10 million without insurance. That's from the Biden plan's own estimate. Minimum 10 million. It's that even if they could get everyone covered, the public option will be the bad option. It's going to be the bad option. If you look at the Vox, people who maybe follow Vox, if you could take a quick look for that, it's like Google Vox and tax. Let me just do a quick search here. Okay, yeah, I got the link right here. One sec, I'll drop it in the, let me drop it here. That should be the video right there. So don't leave yet to go watch it, but do check that out. Well, I mean, Victoria, these are interesting questions. I mean, you could, for instance, have a minimum exemption for capital gains. In Canada, for instance, when I've seen a capital gains increase tax, I've had it exempt in all cases, even for the wealthy, the one main family home. So that you can sell your family home for a profit, quote unquote, without having to pay capital gains on it. There's been that sort of discussion. It's also, you could make it so that for regular people that come to small capital gains, you can limit it. So like the first 50,000 or 30,000 a year of capital gains is only taxed at 50% as it is right now, but it's taxed fully after that to hone in on the high capital gains earners, not somebody that happens to get, a $10,000 capital gain windfall once and then maybe never again. And so there are things you can do. You can also, for instance, maybe allow that to happen. Have capital gained a depreciation calculation. That could happen too. But the point is, right now, whether there's depreciation or not, if I was to sell $100,000 of stock and all of that $100,000 was made this year because I gambled on some penny stock and made $100K, I pay less taxes than if I would have made 80 grand in labor that year, working every day 9 to 5 type thing. And that's not just. Government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Strongly agree. 100%. 100%. Even libertarians should agree with this one. I've had some libertarians, like in Canada, at Queen's University, where I was a grad student at the time, teaching and finishing on my PhD. And like they had the Queen's Club for Liberty, and they basically did a protest when the government mandated calorie information on all products. Like, this bag of chips has this many calories in it, and this much fat, and this much sodium, and blah, blah, blah. And people were like, this is a violation of our freedom. But it isn't. If you're a believer even in like libertarian economics, of like the freedom of the individual to make exchanges, information, reliable, honest information is required for individuals to make known transactions with one another. So that even if you're a believer in fully free market economics, there still needs to be some mechanism to dissuade misinformation. Because if a company says, look, I want to sell you this bag of chips, and there's, 100 grams in the bag, but actually there's only 85 grams in the bag, and they've systematically underweight it, in effect, you've been ripped off. And so you might say, well, it's just a free market. Well, no, it isn't, because you were made a misinformed decision. So businesses that mislead people about the quality of their product, best before dates. We remember, what was it, Volkswagen, who misled the German government on their emission standards, things like that. 100%. 100% they should face consequences. 100%. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. I would strongly agree. I would say that if you are a believer in free markets, and I don't think there's such a thing as a genuine free market, but let's say there is, let's believe the fairy tale. Let's believe the sugar plums and raindrops that a free market is a thing. That companies will, by design, conglomerate and centralize power, right? Even under the argument of like back in undergrad when I took some neoliberal economics classes, they'd say, okay, there's 100 ice cream firms. None of them are big enough to distort the market on their own. But basically what would happen is one of those firms would eventually get some sort of advantage, and they would put out competitors out of business, absorb market share, use that market share to improve economies of scale, use those economies of scale to lower their prices to put more people out of the market, use that, increased competition sharehold to further increase economies of scale. And in many cases, that would lead to, if not monopoly, then at least oligopoly, right? And so if you believe that monopolies restrict free markets and these sorts of things, you do need something, whether it's antitrust suits, whether it's laws that dissuade using proprietary technology to kind of form a quasi-regulatory capture. You do need some sort of control. All right, I am back. Sorry about that, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, how's everyone doing? Everyone enjoying this? Finding this interesting? Okay, so we're going to go to the next page. Page 3 of 6. Making some progress. Okay. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Strongly disagree. I'm pro-choice in pretty much every case. I can't think of a case where I wouldn't be, really. No, strongly disagree. I don't need to weigh in. And as somebody who doesn't have a uterus, doesn't identify as a woman, doesn't have that life experience, no, don't need to spend more time on that. All authority should be questioned. Yeah, I would strongly agree. I mean, are we all authority should be questioned at all times? I mean, should you question your doctor all the time? No. Not to say you should never question your doctor or somebody giving you medical advice, but it's not that we should always be questioning every authority source every day of the week. That I think will lead to, that's the argument some anti-vaxxers will use and flat earthers and things like that. But I do think in general, people should not be afraid to question authority, especially, corporate authority, state authority, police, things like that, the military, but also just in general, appeals to authority should not universally all the time be accepted, right? Look, I have a PhD. I don't bring it up that often, but you shouldn't just say this guy is a PhD, ergo everything he says about Canadian history is 100% true and without controversy. You might say that, okay, this guy is a PhD. He generally knows what he's talking about, so he's credible. But should you just never question me? Of course not. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Strongly disagree. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That sort of retributional. God, I'm struggling with that word. Revenge justice is not the way to get things done. It doesn't lead to a better society. It doesn't lead to lower incidences of crime and things like that. It's nothing more than bloodlust. It's nothing more than bloodlust. Like, if you want to look at the countries that have done the best job at lowering recidivism rates in crime, look to Scandinavia, where they do not treat criminals badly. They do not take away their humanity. They take away their freedom. You have to go to jail, but the jails are far more centered, even in serious cases of crime, on rehabilitation. And if the argument was that a harsh, system of retribution would discourage these things, then the United States would have low recidivism rates, which it does not. But Hammurabic, yeah, that's pretty good, Bob. That's pretty good. But I would also add that even if you say, well, it's not about rehabilitation, it's about justice, and so people deserve justice. Well, I would argue that's a very juvenile and inappropriate form of justice. And if you say, well, if my husband or my son or my wife was attacked by somebody, I would want them to get a harsh penalty. And I would say to that, well, people that are directly affected by a crime aren't on the jury or aren't serving as judges for a reason, because we should not let emotion drive penalty. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Strongly disagree. I think that things can have grander social values. They can even have economic values. Museums and theaters and stuff are obviously important. Things do not necessarily have to be market-oriented or market-driven to be valuable or successful or necessary. But they can also help create the conditions in which you create a vibrant community that does help market-oriented things succeed. So, for instance, certain parts of Toronto and New York, maybe there are theaters and museums that do not strictly survive off private money, but the restaurants and shops and cafes around them benefit from having, this publicly funded, prestigious, infrastructure of art and of culture and of music and of theater around them. And so, no, I don't at all agree with this. I think that there are certain forms of cultural and social and economic and scientific as well, scientific production, that is not now or maybe ever economically viable, but which is socially viable, right? Schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. See, this is a tricky one. This is going to be one that divides people. I strongly disagree. I think education should be compulsory until 16, 17, 18. We can have a debate about where. I know in Europe it's 16, in North America it's 18. That maybe that's going to give me like an authoritarian point, right? But people are going to have a disagreement there. Some on the left think education shouldn't be compulsory, and basically you're using state force to force people into a state detainment. At least Monday to Friday, 8 to 3, September to June. Right? So I still think classroom attendance should be compulsory. Now, this isn't to say that I agree with the actions about making it compulsory. I don't think one-size-fits-all strategies work. I think that when children miss school, there are reasons why, familial, personal, maybe it has learning ability or learning impediment issues, we need to work on, right? That exist. But I think education should be compulsory, and at least until a certain age. And again, we can have a debate about that. Like, is it 16? Is it 18? Whatever. I would say it's at least until the North American equivalent of, say, grade 10, grade 11. Well, John Crowfeather, I mean, that depends on the area, right? That's a different question. Compulsory religious classes. Not all places have compulsory religious classes. In Ontario, for instance, if you go to a Catholic school, a Catholic public school, they do, but at the public boards, they do not. When I went to school in New Brunswick, there was no compulsory religion course. And so that would be a different question. The question would be, do you think schools should have compulsory religious courses and still get public money? And that would be a different question. So that would probably be the first one where I more than a few of you disagreed with me. So all people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Strongly disagree. Look, I'm not one of these people. I'm not a separate but equal supporter. So no, I do not agree with that one. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Strongly disagree. My wife and I, our son's young. He's not even 2 yet, but you speak to your children. You help them learn their emotions, and I don't think physical reinforcement is a good way to teach your parents, teach your children. It is natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Strongly agree. Strongly agree. I think so. Now, I think it's also natural for parents to be nosy nosy AF with regard to their children. So that will probably be an eternal tug of war between children and parents. But I sort of think that within reason, I mean, to a certain degree, when you have a child, you have to, care for them and protect them and help guide them. But I also think that, like, as a society, we have to bear in mind that how we parent can reinforce the kind of society we build. Like, do you guys know that Elf on the Shelf? Like we didn't have Elf on the Shelf when I was a kid. But apparently some people put, like, an elf on the shelf, and then, like, the parents are like, that elf is watching you. And if you're, like, a bad boy or a bad girl, then I'm going to take your toys, and you're not going to get a fun Christmas, and you're going to have a bad Christmas. And, like, I don't know about you guys, but isn't that, like, priming kids so much for the surveillance state? I don't know. Right? So, that's my view. So, yeah. I think children perfectly natural. Now, again, you might think as a parent there are some secrets that you shouldn't have, especially younger children shouldn't have from their parents. Like, you might say it's, you shouldn't just be talking to strange people on the internet without me knowing. Whatever, we can have disagreements about that or agreements about that. But it's natural for them to keep secrets. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Strongly agree. This one is probably a bit of a dated question, if I'm being honest. They should probably update this to all personal narcotics, because increasingly, I mean, when this test came out in pretty much all of North America, it wasn't legal. It wasn't legal to have marijuana, especially non-medicinal, right? So now it is, right? Like, now it is legal, and so it's sort of like, this is like, it's not a worthless question, but it's the sort of question that I feel most people agree with nowadays. I don't know. So I would say, yeah, I strongly agree. And I would agree that at least for personal use, all drugs should be decriminalized. Yeah, certainly. Certainly, 100%. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generations to find jobs. I would strongly disagree with that. That's a function. It's an important function. I don't know if it's the prime function. I think the prime function should be to prepare children for citizenship. Right? To prepare people to be good citizens. Now, some of that might be finding the way that person, to the best of their abilities and interests, can contribute to society. And whether that's through paid employment or not, we don't know. But I think the goal should be to create good citizens. Right? Like that's my viewpoint. You want good citizens. That should be the goal of schooling. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Strongly disagree. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to discourse about the fundamental human rights of other people. Strongly disagree. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Strongly disagree. As I noted before, parents do have to discipline their children in ways, but children, I think, need to, the most important thing I would want them to accept is the humanity and dignity of other human beings and compassion for those people. Be the most important thing. Now, there are elements of discipline. There's elements of self-control and things like that children have to learn, of course. But the most important thing, no, not discipline. Again, it's so interesting. This question is clearly trying to find somebody who's a quote-unquote right-winger, right? And often the kind of people that would click, maybe strongly agree to this one, would then get pissed off when they would be asked to wear a mask. So I do find it a bit interesting. You know what I mean? Like the who they're trying to aim for there. Leslie, this is the political compass test. I dropped a link earlier. I'll drop it again here. There are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. I would agree. Again, I'm not going to play devil's advocate with people's cultures. Or you might even say that there are certain elements of certain societies that you find abhorrent, but it's almost certainly the case that your own society, our own society, has conditions and actions and histories that are also quote-unquote savage. So I would say that in general, I'm not a believer in cultural or ethnic or racial superiority, and that there are only differences. There are those who are able to work and refuse. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society support. Strongly disagree. Again, this question is a bit of a canard because the vast majority of people who are not able to work, who aren't working, actually are able and are the vast majority of people who aren't working want to, and many of those people who are able are involuntarily unemployed in that sense. So, the question is, there should be another question here, right? Where it says, do you think most of the unemployed are lazy? So it should say, most people who are unemployed are lazy. Strongly disagree, agree, and go down the list. Whereas this seems to just assume that, that there's a certain balance there. But I would say no. I think that I'm, at least in general, a supporter of something of a basic income. And I'm also wary of this idea of work. What is work? Many people contribute without contributing economically. We currently don't recognize that. So that's my view. Yeah, Sinistoria, just right on time for me saying it. Many people work, they just don't get paid for it. Yep, 100%. 100%. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Strongly disagree. That's how you die 30 years younger, right? Like, that's just like, keep it bottled inside. But again, that's like an allegory for society. It's like, if you think things are unfair, you should just grit your teeth and keep plugging away. But it's like, no, we should recognize when you're not okay, or when society is not okay. And you know that slogan, right? It's okay to not be okay right now. Right now, especially, we're, you know, this crisis we're living through. But in general, it's okay to not be okay. Right? You know, that's my viewpoint. Yeah. And this, of course, is also a gendered thing, this one right here. Women especially are often told to just smile and carry on. I can't agree with that statement. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. I would strongly disagree. Now, there are some first-generation immigrants that could struggle. Now, it depends, right? Like, very old first-generation immigrants, I mean, maybe I'll put disagree there, because there are very old first-generation immigrants which have a difficult time integrating. If integration is a good thing or a bad thing, we have to debate it here. Certainly somebody who comes here as a child directly from another country, I mean, I think they have no issues with integrating. But if you come here at 75 and you don't speak the language, and what integration likely means, which is the ability to like live and work and learn the official languages and things like that, then it might be tricky. You know, but again, there's all these assumptions here. Is integration good? What is integration? Do immigrants even want to integrate? And even if they don't want to integrate, is that bad? Right? So that's my viewpoint. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree, guys. Surprise, surprise on that one. You know, some people might argue that when companies are successful, workers are successful, which helps the economy. Strong companies, you know, produce good tax bases and things like that. But of course, as we know, corporations rarely pay their taxes. Wealth does not often trickle down to their workforce, except for maybe at the very top, or, you know, on the top, you know, the upper middle class of their corporation. And that often what happens is corporations and wealthy people, when they get rich, not only do not trickle down to the, trickle their wealth and success down to the masses, but use their economic power, their cash, what have you, to further distort social and political and cultural and economic systems to further enrich themselves. So in many ways, corporations being uber successful can be bad for working people in some cases. As we've noted, if you believe monopolies are bad, super successful corporations are more likely to become monopolies or are actually already functional monopolies. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I would strongly disagree with that. I mean, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I would disagree with that. My view is that, like, we have this debate in Canada right now where the federal government has, in a sense, subsidize certain legacy forms of journalism. You know, my view is that there are certain risks, of course, of governments funding news coverage that's meant to criticize them, or just the government in itself. But I also see the value in news independent of profit motives. And so you have to weigh these things. And so maybe it's not ideal that newspapers dedicated to covering the government and its scandals are getting money from governments. The reality is that better than the alternative, no news at all, either covering the government or anything else. Right? So, like, for instance, here in Canada, we're getting this situation a lot now where locally in a lot of communities, small towns, but even regular size, like, moderately sized cities, they're basically have no newspaper anymore. Like, we have some national newspapers and things like that, maybe regional newspapers, but a lot of towns don't have newspapers anymore. And so, is it better that that town have a newspaper that gets some public money than it not have a newspaper at all? I don't know. So that's why I'm disagree there. All right. Next question. Our civil liberties are being excessively curved in the name of counterterrorism. Yeah, I would strongly agree with that. Now, that's not equal for everyone, of course. There are certain segments of the population whose civil liberties are being more curbed than others. But yeah, I would agree. I would agree that in whether it's in Canada through C-51 or the Patriot Act and all the addendums to the Patriot Act in the United States, that regular working class people, especially if you're a minority, if you say you're a Muslim American or what have you, your rights and your liberties are certainly being affected. And you're being expected to give up more of those liberties in the name of, quote unquote, keeping the country safe. And yeah, that's certainly an issue. Yeah. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I would probably... Yeah, I would strongly disagree with that, actually. Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know if those arguments are really delays, as in helping to iron out the issues as they develop. And so part of the implementation process is deliberation, and genuine deliberation. And certainly in the United States and in Canada, the US more than Canada, your system is designed for gridlock. Ours less so. There is... people will use democracy to effectively stop reforms. But I think that, what they might call arguments, I think the deliberative process is part of this streamlining process. That without the deliberation, you implement a policy, realize the errors, and maybe waste time as you tweak and tweak and tweak. More genuine deliberation, which could happen in a one-party state, but is perhaps less likely, maybe would have saved you time. Now, people saying that was a long pause. Some of these, it's like, I know where I am. It's agree or strongly disagree, but I have to think it out. And I want to think out what I'm going to say to you guys, too. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need be worried. Strongly disagree. So many reasons. Just one example. Two examples. One, the police, individual police officers and police culture do not treat people equally, right? They don't. And so if you're poor, if you have mental health issues, especially if you're racialized, if you're black or indigenous or Hispanic or what have you, you will not be treated fairly, even if you aren't a wrongdoer. We've seen tons of innocent people lose their lives, and they weren't wrongdoers, right? And specifically with electronics, we've seen that at least some of the facial recognition software that we have is not that accurate. And it's especially not accurate for minorities. That when they test those systems out, they find high error rates, especially among African Americans. And so, if facial recognition software is inaccurate and will lead to false positives, then the increased technology could get you in legal trouble even though you've done nothing wrong. So yeah, I strongly disagree with that. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. Disagree. I don't think the death penalty should exist for any crimes. That's my view. Look, I'm a pretty big believer in rehabilitation, but I probably recognize that not everyone is fully rehabilitatable. I don't know, like, I would see myself in broad terms as a prison abolitionist, but I'm not exactly sure how you get to a total, full, unequivocal abolition of compulsively isolating people from society. I don't know. I have to do more research before I make any conclusive things, but my view is that the death penalty should not be an option, even for the most serious and heinous of crimes. Beyond the fact that people make mistakes, beyond the fact that, in some cases, the process of undertaking the penalty can be cruel and painful. It's not something I morally support. Right? So, yeah. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and people below to be commanded. Strongly disagree. Even if you believe in the need for leadership, the need to have leaders, this framing is insidious. It's insidious. Because from my perspective, leaders are not there to be obeyed. They're there to serve. Right? They're there to serve. Now, like classical liberals, they're hypocritical and they don't actually believe what they say. They're like, we want to build a society of equality. No women votes and we own people. Like we own black people. But like the argument was always like the ruler governs on the consent of the people they rule. So in essence, the principal power of commanding should belong to the governed class, and the principal policy of obeying should belong to the leadership class. Now, of course, in some cases, leaders will have to make decisions that may be unpopular. Even in a Soviet-style system, councils might make a decision that go against the rank and file in some cases. Or the rank and file will be divided. Leaders have to make a decision that will alienate some workers but not others. But to make it in this sense that there are people below that are, in a sense, pets or children to the adults that govern, I disagree with that. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Strongly disagree. I don't think you could determine what is art, what isn't art. At least not on an authoritative basis. You might personally think that. But I think abstract art is art. It might not be art I like. In some cases, I do like it. But of course, it says here, abstract art that doesn't represent anything. What art doesn't represent anything? What does that mean? What does doesn't represent anything mean? To me, that's an indefinable, undefinable, unquantifiable claim that it doesn't define anything. Right? Like we've seen one, you can't speak for the artist, and two, even beyond the artist's intent, individual consumers of the art can find and read out different interpretations. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Strongly disagree. As we noted that earlier with the eye for an eye thing. No, 100% rehabilitation should be more important. Is punishment part of that rehabilitative process in some cases? Maybe. But I think, like, the point is that you're removing people from society as an ability to help them rehabilitate, to center them away from the stimuli that led them to the actions they took. If that's seen as punishment, so be it. But the idea that punishment should be the overarching goal, or even just a major goal, is something I strongly disagree with. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Again, I would probably put disagree. Again, would there be some criminals that are very difficult to rehabilitate? Probably. But even, well, actually, no. I'm going to say strongly disagree. Because, thinking about it, even if you think some criminals are impossible to rehabilitate, through the attempt, you likely learn something about the process of rehabilitation, which could be used on people that are still accessible, that are still savable. So here in Canada, we all know the famous example of, like, say, Paul Bernardo, the famous case. Many people would say he's the kind of person that's actually just an awful man, and he maybe can't be rehabilitated. I'm not having, like, a debate on this, but, like, let's just say that's true. Let's say that's true. Then we have to get to this question of, is there still value in trying and failing? Right? Is there still a value in trying and failing? For people that are similar to him, but less gone. And that's why I would say I disagree. And that's, again, the wording here. It's a waste of time to try and rehabilitate some criminals. If it said here, some criminals can't be rehabilitated, I would say disagree instead of strongly disagree. You know, or you know, because, like, I would say, if they said most criminals, what have you. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Strongly disagree. I wouldn't necessarily say that the manufacturer, if by that they mean, like, the people in the factory, are less important than writers and artists, but I don't think you can individually determine these things. And even within a capitalistic matrix, let's be real, there are many writers and artists that make far more money and are far more productive from a capitalist perspective than a small business person or a factory owner. So I would strongly disagree. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Strongly disagree. Women should be able to choose to be homemakers. So should men. I think that we should have a greater ability to allow people to meaningfully contribute to society in ways that are not strictly based on market contributions. But this idea that mothers by design, first of all, the heteronormativity here is off the charts. But no one, that's not enforced by gender. Adored pride, like, red flag question. Ladies, if you're gonna have a first date with somebody, get them to take this test and check the results. They should just make this test required for Bumble or something. It's like you get to see it before you get to swipe on a guy. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Honestly, I'm putting agree there because I don't fully understand the question. Right? I think what they're saying, now maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is like multinational corporations are taking the plant resources, say from tropical countries, like developing countries, say in Latin America, and then they're genetically modifying those products for a profit in like laboratories in Canada, the United States, Germany, G7, G20 countries. And I guess I could see that point. But of course, it's like, can one society own a plant genetic resource? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure. That's why I'm like that's an inkling one. And so I'm leaning with my inkling, if that makes sense. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Strongly disagree. You might need to, at times, align with people that don't fully share your views. I think to a certain degree, that might be seen as maturity, although sticking to your guns is not by default immaturity. It's not immaturity to say, I have principles and I'm going to stand for those principles. Although, like some of us on the left, some people might argue that, maybe there's some maturity required to realize that you don't have all the answers. But when you say the establishment, no, I can't agree with that at all. Yeah, people are bringing up the Monsanto thing, but see, like, that's interesting here. It's like the plant genetic resources of developing countries. It's a weird and worded question. Whereas if the question, Bert, was like, should Monsanto be allowed to sue people for their seeds flying onto their property, I would say strongly disagree. I don't think you should be able to necessarily copyright a genetic modification, but even if you should, it's like, if anything, they should sue you for your property invading their space. Page 5. We got this page and another left. We're making good progress. Astrology accurately explains many things. I'm going to say I strongly disagree. That's just my thing. From my look at it, I've seen nothing that accurately explains many things. This isn't to say that I begrudge people that find meaning in it. I mean, look, I'm a guy who is baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church and has a son baptized in the Greek Orthodox Church. So I'm not going to be one to judge people on their, millennia old crazy mythologies, right? I'm not. So for me personally, I don't think it explains accurately many things. I don't know if it explains accurately any things. Maybe it does, like by happenstance, but that's just my view. You cannot be moral without being religious. Strongly disagree. I do think for some people, their path to morality is via religion. Right? For some folks, they become moral through religion. But for other folks, morality could be stunted by religion. So I would say that no, certainly not. I'm not one of these people that says religion makes you less moral necessarily. I just don't think the correlation is all that strong in aggregate. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Strongly disagree. Charity is a stopgap. In some cases, charity is a deliberate tool to stunt the calls for more social equity. That you have enough charity to not have people totally become destitute. The goal of the food banks, if I'm a food bank operator, my goal should be to not exist. The goal for any good charity should be to not exist. Now, that might not happen. I don't think you'll ever get to a point where some form of charitable organization won't be needed. Like, you probably always need something. But I think the goal of any reasonable charity is to try to dissolve itself through reforming the society to make itself unnecessary. Some people are naturally unlucky. Huh. Like, what does that mean? Does that mean, like there's the fates? Like, the fates have made you unlucky? Or does it mean that, like, based on your circumstances, like, you'll have more bad luck, quote unquote? Because if it's like, oh, I'm lucky, I'm a white guy, not disabled, nothing like, born in Canada. I mean, I grew up poor, but like not destitute poor, but like well below average. But I didn't grow up destitute. On global terms, I'm lucky in that sense. And so does that define luck? Or do they mean luck as in the sense like two twins, one of them will have better quote unquote luck as an immutable category? I'm going to say they mean the latter, and I'm going to hit disagree. The Surf Times, where is Christo just a regular streamer now? Come to Twitch, we have cookies. No. We do a regular every Wednesday night stream here on Twitch or on YouTube. So we've been doing this for about a year now. I started last summer doing streams. It was the Patreon goal when I hit $100 on Patreon. It was my first stretch goal. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. I would say strongly disagree. That's personal for me. Again, and I'm someone that has a child that's baptized and may, depending on, because I'm not so opposed to Catholic schools that I wouldn't send my child there. Other things would be more important to me, like the quality of French immersion, the location, like how close it is to my house, things like that. So, looking at, like, just hypothetically, if my wife and I live where we do now, my son may go to a Catholic school for his for his elementary school experience, because it's the nearest school. It has French immersion, and that's more important to us. And by happenstance, it's a Catholic school. So, but that's not defining our choice of school. Finally, a look at sex. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. Strongly disagree. If you want to be celibate, be celibate. It's not immoral to have sex outside of marriage. A same-sex couple in a loving, stable relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. 100%. Any person, not even couples, but any person that has the desire and the ability to love and raise and take care of a child, should have the ability to adopt. And for couples, regardless of orientation or gender, binary or non-binary, they should be allowed to adopt. I think these are going to be very quick ones, frankly. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Strongly agree. I don't even need to get into that. 100%. Although there are questions with pornography and other forms of sex work about labor rights and about gender egalitarian issues in them. So, but my viewpoint would, I guess, be my viewpoint would be, even if you think, okay, pornography as it exists is misogynistic, and does include elements of, like, racial stereotyping, of course, is that eliminated by illegalizing it? And I would say no. Betty says, when does the barber shop stop back in Canada? I think they might be open now, but my wife and I, we're not ready to go back to barbershops yet. We're a little bit more cautious than that. Where's the OnlyFans? I do not have an OnlyFans. Sex work is 100% valid. Thanks, Surf Times. Everyone, check out Surf Times. They're the serfs who you probably know but this is like their daily news channel. They take their clips from their streams on Twitch, and it's they're growing fast. So jump on board. No one can feel naturally homosexual. Strongly disagree. Now, I identify as heterosexual, but my view is that I never came to that realization as a negotiation. It just sort of happened. So if I can feel naturally heterosexual, oh, I missed one. Okay, I'm gonna go over to that one. Thanks, Adored Pariah. I'll go back. Yeah. If I can feel naturally heterosexual, I see no reason why others couldn't feel naturally homosexual or bisexual or pansexual or what have you. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Strongly agree. Strongly agree. Don't need to add anything there. People are noting that was the quote basically from Pierre Trudeau. The state has no business in the bedroom of the nation. People are saying like I look like a 1970s mobster. Okay, from this angle, I don't disagree. I have to work on my side angle. This is the first time I've done it. I noticed that I'm not in the camera shot all too often when I'm like looking at the screen. I'm gonna work on that. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. Strongly disagree. I think it's important people are open. It might make individuals uncomfortable. In some cases, it might make me uncomfortable. But I think it's fantastic that people can be more open about sex, their desires, things like that. Especially how openness has increased for marginalized people. Like, white men have not always, but like straight white men have always been able to be relatively open about their desires and their proclivities and things like that. And now, more than ever, other people, other orientations, women, other folks have been able to be open about what they want and don't want, and I think that's a good thing. So where do I stand? It says here, again, just as a review here, here's the scale. Basically, they have 4 quadrants based on 2 axes here. There's authoritarian versus libertarian. Libertarian being more socially permissive, being in favor of things like gay marriage and being against state surveillance. And economics being more in favor of redistribution, of regulation of corporations, of taxing the rich, etc. And libertarian to be more, and the right being more in favor of promoting capitalism and what have you. So, there's not one single axis of leftism and rightism in that sense. Everyone always says I look like Zizek, and at first I thought people were trolling me, but people say it so much that like I'm thinking it's probably true. And this gives you a bit of an understanding of where people might be on the chart, right? So like Stalin might be like a right authoritarian, a left authoritarian. Stalinist, I don't know if you're going to agree with me there, but like that's just a hypothetical, right? Like he's on left, he's collectivist but authoritarian as he regards civil liberties. So as you can see, I am strongly left-wing. I am almost perfectly left-wing. So I'm going to post my score. Maybe people want to share this. That's my score. So the negative means left on both scales. On a scale of -10 to +10, I scored a -988 on economic left-right issues and a -867 on social issues. I mean, that's probably accurate. I'm a pretty left-wing guy. Like, I know people say, oh, this guy, he helps the NDP. He maybe can't be that left-wing, but like that's a strategic thing for me. Yeah, this probably captures my values. Although I wonder if once you start getting from one end of the scale to another, they should almost have addendums, like an addendum questions to really see how extreme you are. Like, if you're very authoritarian or very libertarian, they should start asking you more and more controversial questions to see just how you are. Because the way it works here, and this is where I think the scale can be distorting, is that all of the questions it asked on the strongly agree to strongly disagree model, which is only a 1 to 4 scale, you can hit strongly agree and end up where I am, but there still might be further distinctions between me and, say, another person like Sean, who also scored exactly the same social economic score as me. Sean here getting 988 like I did, right? 988 like I did. But if you asked more specific questions, you might get a different answer. And so I think that that's something we're definitely missing there.